I always thought the creaking floors in my house were my late husband's way of saying good morning. That old 2-story home on Magnolia Street had held my whole life inside it, from the day I brought my daughter Danielle home wrapped in a pink hospital blanket, to the day she walked down the steps in her cap and gown, cheeks shining with hope. I'm 56 now. But some mornings, when sunlight hits the dining room just right, I still see her sitting there, 10 years old, elbows on the table, laughing with a mouthful of cornbread. I can still smell the cocoa butter and the strawberry hair grease I used to smooth her curls before school. Back then, it was just the two of us. Me and my girl. We didn't have much, but we had rhythm. She'd hum while I fried chicken. I'd tap the counter to the beat. Every bill I paid, every shift I pulled at the clinic, every prayer I whispered at night, all of it was for her. That's what mothers do, right? We give until the edges of ourselves start to fray. When Danielle married Calvin, I told myself it was time to let her live her own life. He was charming at first, all pressed suits and polite smiles. He'd shake my hand every Sunday after church, calling me Miss Martha like I was somebody important. But there was always a flicker behind his eyes. The kind of look that measures people. I ignored it. A mother wants to believe her daughter has found someone who'll love her the way she deserves. But the changes started small. Danielle stopped calling as much. She'd answer my texts with short replies, sometimes just a heart emoji or a busy right now, Mom. The warm, chatty girl who used to tell me everything, from her bad dreams to her grocery list, turned into someone I could barely recognize. When she came by for Sunday dinner, Calvin always had something to say about how I did things. "You still cooking with lard, Miss Martha?" He'd laugh, glancing at Danielle. "No wonder you're always tired." And she'd laugh too, but it wasn't the same laugh. It was thinner, sharper, like she was laughing at something she didn't really find funny. I'd smile and swallow it down, even though it stung. Because when you love someone, you learn to make peace with small hurts. My grandson, little Eli, became my new light. He had Danielle's eyes but my spirit, curious, sensitive, always watching. Whenever they came over, he'd crawl into my lap with his little toy trucks and say, "Grandma, tell me a story." And I would, about his mama when she was his age, about the time she tried to bake cookies with salt instead of sugar, or how she used to chase lightning bugs barefoot on hot summer nights. He'd giggle so hard he'd hiccup, and in those moments, I felt like maybe everything was okay. But mothers can feel storms long before the rain falls. A few weeks before the baby shower, Danielle called me, her voice sweet but distant, like she was trying too hard. "Mama," she said, "we're having the shower at that new event hall near downtown. Calvin's idea. You don't have to worry about anything, just bring yourself." I laughed softly. "You sure you don't want me to bake something?" "You know folks still talk about my pound cake," she hesitated. "That's sweet, but no, we've got a caterer. Calvin already ordered the cake." That pause told me more than her words. Something wasn't right. Could hear Calvin in the background saying something about keeping it. Professional this time. She shushed him quickly. Pretending it was nothing, I told myself to let it go. I wasn't going to make a fuss over a baby shower. But that night, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping my tea, I stared at the empty chair across from me, the one where Danielle used to sit, and felt a heaviness in my chest. Maybe it was just age catching up with me. Or maybe it was the ache of a mother realizing her child had learned to live without her. Still, I wanted to show up. To be proud. To remind her that no matter how far she went, she had roots in me. So I pulled out my best dress, a soft peach one with lace sleeves. I even got my hair done at Miss Alma's salon down on Maple Street. "Gotta look like a queen for that baby shower," Alma said, patting my shoulder. I smiled, but deep down, I wondered what kind of queen keeps her crown steady when her kingdom starts to drift away. That Saturday morning, I packed a small gift bag, tiny socks, a crocheted blanket, and a silver rattle I'd kept since Danielle was born. I stood by my front door for a long time before leaving, taking one last look around my home, the faded family pictures, the clock that ticked a little offbeat, the scent of lemon cleaner in the air. Every memory lived in those walls, and for the first time, I felt like I might be walking away from something I'd never get back. When I pulled up to the hall, the parking lot was full. Fancy cars lined up like soldiers, all shiny and new. Inside, I could hear laughter, music, clinking glasses. It didn't sound like family. It sounded like a party for strangers. Danielle met me at the door, glowing in her lavender dress. "Mama, you made it," she said, hugging me quickly, too quickly. Her perfume was strong enough to sting my eyes. I wouldn't miss it for the world. "Baby," I said softly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And just behind her, Calvin stood with that same measuring look, polite, cold, calculating, somewhere deep in my gut. I felt that creak again, like the old floors back home warning me. Something heavy was coming. The air inside that hall felt too still for all the noise it carried. It smelled like roses and money, or the kind of scent that covers up something sour underneath. Everywhere I looked, there were decorations that didn't look like my daughter's style at all. Gold balloons, silk tablecloths, a giant banner that said, "Welcome Baby Carter," in bold white letters. Danielle never liked showy things, but this looked like Calvin's world. Perfect, polished, and expensive for no reason. When I used to plan parties for Danielle, we'd have homemade banners and dollar store balloons. The joy came from the laughter, not the look. But now, it all felt staged, like love had been replaced with presentation. Danielle floated between tables, smiling, laughing too loud, hugging people I didn't recognize. I stood near the punch bowl, holding my purse a little tighter, watching her move through that crowd like someone playing a role in a movie she didn't audition for. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Miss Martha. I was hoping I'd see you here." It was Sharon, an old friend from church. She rushed up, holding a small gift bag with pink tissue paper sticking out the top. "I can't believe Danielle's all grown up and about to be a mama herself," she said. I smiled, trying to sound light. "Me neither. Seems like just yesterday she was running through my kitchen in pigtails." Sharon looked around and lowered her voice. "It's beautiful in here." "But they must have spent a fortune," I chuckled softly. "That's Calvin for you. Likes to make things big." Before I could say more, Calvin appeared out of nowhere, hand on Danielle's shoulder. "Everything okay over here?" His smile was wide, but his eyes were sharp, like he wanted to control every inch of that room. "All good," Danielle said quickly. "Mama was just catching up with Sharon." Calvin nodded, then turned to me. "You found everything all right, Miss Martha? Parking can be a mess in this part of town." "Yes, I did," I said. "Thanks for checking." He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. Then he turned to a nearby waiter and whispered something. The waiter nodded and hurried off. Something about the way he did it made my skin prickle. I looked around at the tables, at the people who probably didn't know me, but smiled politely anyway. A few of Danielle's old friends from high school waved, but most were Calvin's co-workers, business associates, or people from his family, including his mother, Veronica. Now that woman had a presence. She sat at a table near the front, wearing a pale blue suit that probably cost more than my car. Her nails were long and painted white, her hair pulled back tight as if kindness had no place in her day. When our eyes met, she gave me a thin smile. "Miss Johnson, lovely to see you," she said. Her tone polite but cold. "It's Martha," I corrected gently. "Nice to see you too," she nodded. "Danielle looks radiant, doesn't she? Calvin's really brought her out of her shell." I smiled, though my jaw clenched. She was already shining long before Calvin came along. Veronica's smile froze for half a second, just enough for me to see the tension under all that grace. I excused myself and found Eli sitting quietly near the dessert table, swinging his little legs. "Hey, baby," I said, touching his shoulder. "You okay?" He nodded, then whispered, "Mommy says I shouldn't eat too much sugar today." I smiled. "Well, Grandma says a little piece won't hurt. I'll sneak you one later." That made him giggle, the kind of innocent laugh that warms your heart no matter how cold the room feels. Just then, Danielle came over carrying a plate. "Mama, sit down." "I'll serve you in a bit," she said sweetly, placing her hand on my arm. "That's all right, baby. I can get my own." She cut me off quickly. No, you've done enough. Let me take care of you today." Her tone was soft but firm, practiced. I didn't want to make a scene, so I nodded. "All right, sweetheart. Thank you." She smiled, kissed my cheek, then turned toward the buffet. Calvin followed her, whispering something in her ear. I couldn't hear what he said, but her expression faltered for a moment. Then she glanced back at me. Something in that look made my stomach twist. A few minutes later, as people started gathering around the cake table, Veronica stood up and clinked her glass. "Everyone, let's celebrate my new grandbaby," she said loudly. "A toast to family, to the future." People cheered. Glasses lifted. Danielle laughed. But I noticed how she avoided looking in my direction. I felt a tap on my elbow. It was Sharon again. "Martha, honey, you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just a little tired, that's all." But the truth was my heart was restless. Something about all this, the forced laughter, the glances, the way Danielle seemed both nervous and distant. It wasn't right. When Danielle brought over my plate, she set it down carefully, smiling a little too long. "Here you go." "Mama, you'll love it," she said. I noticed she had a separate plate for herself. Same food, same portions. Or so it looked. Calvin came behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "See? Told you. Everything perfect." She flinched slightly under his touch. My chest tightened. I tried to focus on Eli, who was sitting across from me, munching on a cookie. He looked calm, until suddenly his face changed. His eyes darted between me and Danielle, and then back again. I frowned. "You okay, baby?" He hesitated, then leaned over the table, whispering, "Grandma, don't eat that cake." For a moment, everything went still. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the chatter. It all faded into the background. I looked at him, then at my plate, then at Danielle, whose smile froze mid-laugh, her face drained of color, and in that second, I knew something had just cracked wide open. You know how sometimes the world keeps spinning, but you're standing still, like everyone else is part of a movie you've suddenly stepped out of. That's how it felt in that moment. Eli's small hand was still resting against my arm when he whispered those words. "Grandma, don't eat that cake." It was such a soft, innocent voice. But it carried weight, like thunder wrapped in cotton. I froze, my smile glued in place while laughter echoed around us. The other guests clapped, cameras flashed, someone started a cheerful chant. "Cut the cake! Cut the cake!" Danielle was standing right in front of me, her perfect lavender dress shimmering under the hall lights. She had that practiced smile she used when she wanted people to think everything was fine. But her eyes were wide, darting from Eli to me, then to Calvin, and just like that, her hand trembled. Just a flicker, but I saw it, because a mother always notices what the rest of the world misses. I looked down at the cake again. 3 layers, thick white frosting, gold trimming, beautiful, expensive, a slice already waiting for me. The smallest fork set perfectly beside it. "Go ahead." "Mama," Danielle said softly, her voice thin as paper, "you always loved cake." Her tone wasn't sweet, it was forced, careful, like she was walking a tightrope. I smiled faintly. "You know I do, baby. You made this yourself?" She shook her head too quickly. "No, Calvin ordered it special. Everything's from a professional caterer." Calvin stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder again. He had that same perfect grin he wore like armor. "Don't be shy now, Miss Martha," he said. "Try a bite. Tell us what you think." His voice was smooth. But something cold slithered through it, like a dare wrapped in charm. I glanced back at Eli, who was now staring down at his little shoes, fidgeting nervously. My heart squeezed. I didn't pick up the fork. Instead, I reached for my napkin and said lightly, "I'm going to wait till after the toast. Don't want to ruin my appetite." "Suit yourself," Calvin said, shrugging. But I saw a shadow pass over his face, gone almost as soon as it came. Veronica, his mother, raised her glass again. "To family and to new beginnings," she declared. Everyone echoed her words. Everyone except me. As I pretended to sip my punch, my eyes stayed fixed on Danielle. Her smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her glass so hard I thought it might crack. That was when I saw it. Just a tiny detail. But it hit me like a slap. Her plate. She had switched plates. The one in front of her was now closer to Calvin's hand. And the one Calvin had placed before me, my plate, had been quietly replaced when I looked away. My throat went dry. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. But I knew one thing. Something dark was happening right in front of me, wrapped in lace and laughter. I forced myself to stay calm. My smile never wavered. I even clapped when Danielle opened gifts, tiny onesies, bottles, blankets. I nodded politely when people complimented her. But every time she looked at me, her face flickered between guilt and fear. At one point, Sharon leaned over and whispered, "You all right, Martha?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," I smiled. "Just tired, honey. Long day," but inside my heart was beating like a drum. Every laugh around me sounded wrong. Too loud, too hollow. Eli came and sat beside me again. He leaned in close and whispered, "Grandma, don't tell Mommy I said anything." I nodded gently, brushing his hair back. "Don't you worry, baby. Grandma's not saying a word." The whole time Danielle avoided my gaze. And when the music started again, she slipped away to the back of the hall with Calvin, whispering fast and low. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her hands. She was wringing them together, shoulders tense. He was leaning in close, his expression cold, jaw tight. For a second, she turned toward me, and in her eyes, I saw something that broke me. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear for me. And just like that, the pieces began to move in my head. The legal papers she had me sign months ago after my surgery. The sudden bank withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing. The way Calvin had been talking about protecting assets and planning for the baby's future. Something bigger was at play. And now, my sweet grandson had stumbled into it. The rest of the party blurred together. I smiled for pictures, hugged people, nodded when Veronica went on about how lucky Danielle was to marry up. But my mind was elsewhere, on that cake, that switch, that look. By the time it ended, my face hurt from pretending. Danielle hugged me at the door, voice trembling. "Mama, I'm so glad you came." It meant the world. I wanted to ask why. Why she looked so scared. Why she switched my plate, but I didn't. I just said, "Of course, baby, always." When I stepped outside, the air hit different, cool and heavy, like rain before a storm. I got in my car, sat there for a long moment and stared at my hands. They were trembling. On the passenger seat, my untouched plate of cake sat perfectly wrapped in cellophane. I'd brought it with me when the waiter insisted on boxing leftovers. I looked at that. Slice under the dome of plastic, perfect, sweet, harmless. But something deep in my gut told me not to throw it away. Not yet. The drive home that afternoon felt longer than usual. The radio was on, but I couldn't hear it, just noise between my thoughts. The world outside the windshield moved like a blur. Traffic lights, billboards, Sunday drivers with somewhere safe to be. I had my hands tight on the steering wheel, and in the seat beside me, that slice of cake sat perfectly still, wrapped in its little plastic dome, looking so innocent. But all I could hear were Eli's words replaying in my head over and over. "Grandma, don't eat that cake." I'd raised my daughter better than to be cruel, or at least I thought I had. But that look on her face when he said it wasn't embarrassment, it was terror. When I got home, I placed the cake on the kitchen counter, still sealed, still untouched. The light from the window hit it just right, making the frosting glisten like glass. I sat there for a while, staring at it, trying to reason with myself. Maybe Eli misunderstood. Maybe Danielle switched plates because mine had too much frosting or too little. Maybe I was tired and seeing ghosts where there weren't any. But mothers know, even when we don't want to. I leaned closer and sniffed. At first, nothing. Then a faint scent beneath the sweetness. Chemical, bitter, sharp. The kind of smell that doesn't belong anywhere near food. My stomach turned. I backed away, hands shaking. Then I laughed, a short, nervous laugh that didn't sound like mine. "You're losing it, Martha," I whispered to myself. "You're just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was scared. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Danielle's pale face at the shower, Calvin's hand on her shoulder, Eli's wide eyes. I kept asking myself the same question. What kind of mother would do something like that? When I finally drifted off, it was almost dawn, and when I woke, I knew what I had to do. I got dressed, slipped the cake into a Ziploc container, and drove straight to my friend Deborah's house. She'd worked in a hospital lab for 20 years and didn't ask too many questions if you came to her with quiet eyes. "Morning, Martha," she said, opening her door in a housecoat. "You look like you ain't slept." "I haven't," I said. "Deborah, I need a favor, and I need it to stay between us." She frowned but nodded. "What kind of favor?" I held out the container. "I just need you to tell me what's in this." She looked confused at first, then concerned. "That's cake?" I nodded. "It's cake." She hesitated, then sighed. "All right, honey. I'll take a look. But you gotta tell me what's going on." I didn't. Not yet. I just said, "If I'm wrong, I'll owe you a new one." "But if I'm right?" She didn't make me finish. While I waited, I went home and tried to keep busy, washing dishes that were already clean, folding clothes that didn't need folding. But the quiet was heavy. Every clock tick sounded like an accusation. By mid-afternoon, my phone rang. It was Deborah. Her voice was low, serious. "Martha, you need to come over." When I got there, she was waiting on her porch, holding the same plastic container, now empty. She didn't look me in the eyes. "What did you find?" I asked. She hesitated, glancing around before speaking. "Traces of a sedative. Not enough to kill you, but enough to make you sick, confused, dizzy, maybe disoriented for hours." My knees went weak. I grabbed the railing to steady myself. "Martha," she said softly, "who gave you that cake?" I swallowed hard. My throat burned. "My daughter." Deborah's face broke. Oh Lord, I didn't cry, not then. The tears would come later, but at that moment, I felt hollow, like something sacred inside me had cracked. I thanked her, hugged her tight, and promised I wouldn't tell anyone how I found out. Then I drove home, straight to my living room, and sat in the dark. That's when it all started coming back. Every strange moment, every red flag I'd brushed off. The day Danielle brought over papers for me to sign after my surgery. Just something to simplify things. Mama. The times Calvin joked about old people forgetting stuff. The way Danielle stopped coming by without him. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about ownership. And that cake? That wasn't a mistake. That was a test. To see if I'd eat it, to see if I'd trust her enough to fall asleep easy. But Eli had stopped it. My sweet boy, 8 years old and brave enough to whisper a warning that saved me. By the time the sun set that evening, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream or fight, or call the police. Not yet. I was going to find out why, so I called Danielle. She didn't pick up the first time, or the second. When she finally answered, her voice was shaky. "Hey, Mama, you okay?" "I'm fine," I said calmly. "Just wanted to thank you again for the shower." "Everything was beautiful." There was a pause. "Oh, well, I'm glad you liked it." "I did," I said softly. "Especially the cake." Silence, long, heavy. "Mama," she whispered. I'll come by tomorrow," I interrupted. "We can have lunch. Just you and me." When I hung up, my hands stopped shaking. Because I finally understood. Whatever game Calvin was playing, he'd taught my daughter how to lie. But he hadn't taught her how to lie to me. And tomorrow, I was going to make her tell me everything. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Danielle as a little girl again, barefoot, laughing, her hands sticky from melting popsicles, and then I'd see her grown-up face from the baby shower, pale and trembling behind that fake smile. By morning, my heart felt heavy enough to drag the rest of me down. I brewed coffee I didn't drink, cleaned a counter that was already clean, then finally grabbed my keys and drove to Danielle's house. The closer I got, the tighter my chest grew. I told myself I wasn't going there angry. I just wanted the truth. A mother deserves that much. Their neighborhood looked like something from a magazine. Perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, people who waved without meaning it. I parked by the curb and sat for a moment, watching the curtains move in her front window. When she opened the door, she looked startled. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, her robe tied too tight, like she hadn't expected company. "Mama, what are you doing here?" "I told you I'd come by," I said gently. "You forget already?" She hesitated. "I know. I just didn't think you meant today." I smiled faintly. "Well, you know me. Always on time." I stepped inside before she could protest. The house was spotless, like someone had been cleaning to keep busy. A faint lemon scent hung in the air, familiar but not comforting. "Where's Calvin?" I asked. At work, she said quickly. Too quickly. Good, I murmured. We can talk. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, like she was searching for an excuse to escape. Mama, if this is about the shower. It is, I said, setting my purse down on the counter. It's exactly about that. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She wrapped her arms around herself, rubbing her elbows like she was cold. I studied her face. My daughter's face. Same eyes, same nose, same dimple on her left cheek, and yet I barely recognized the woman standing in front of me. Danielle, I said softly. What was in that cake? She froze. Every bit of color drained from her cheeks. What? You heard me. Mama, what are you talking about? It was cake. Calvin ordered it. Don't, I said quietly. Don't say his name like it's a shield. I didn't eat it, Danielle. I took it to someone who knows what she's doing, and she found something in it. Something that could have made me sick, maybe worse. She staggered back a little, pressing a hand to her mouth. No, Mama, I didn't. Then tell me why you switched my plate, I snapped, my voice cracking for the first time. Right there, in front of everyone. Eli saw you. He warned me. Why, Danielle? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't move closer. She just shook her head. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. It wasn't supposed to happen? I repeated, my heart dropping into my stomach. She turned away, pacing the kitchen floor. Mama, please. I didn't mean for you to... To what? I cut in. Find out? Die quietly? Lose my mind so you could have the house? She stopped cold. Her shoulders stiffened. It's not like that. Oh, baby, I whispered, shaking my head. Don't lie to me. You sound just like him now, her lip trembled. Calvin said it was just to help with the paperwork. He said you'd signed things that weren't legal, and if we transferred the property under his name, we could fix it later. He said it was temporary. I laughed then, not out of humor, but disbelief. You believed that man more than your own mother? Mama, he said you were getting forgetful. She cried. He said you were making mistakes, paying bills twice, signing the wrong checks, forgetting things. I stared at her, stunned. So you thought drugging me would help? Was that the plan? Her tears finally spilled over. I didn't know, Mama, I swear. He said it was just something mild, something to calm you down during the party, to keep you from making a scene. He said you'd been off lately. My throat tightened. Off? She nodded helplessly. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. But he said if I didn't help, we'd lose the baby's nursery. He said you'd change your will, take the house back. He said, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. What about what you said, Danielle? You didn't think to ask your mama what was real before you tried to make her sick? She broke then, sobbing, sliding down against the counter, covering her face. I wanted to reach out to her. I really did, but my arms felt like stone, because love and disappointment don't fit in the same heartbeat. After a long silence, I whispered, Where's Eli right now? She looked up, blinking through tears. At school. Good. My voice was steady again. Because that boy has more sense than the both of you. She started crying harder, rocking back and forth. I didn't know what else to do, Mama. I thought I was helping Calvin fix things. I didn't know. I cut her off cold. You didn't want to know. Because deep down, you knew the man you married was poison. You just hoped I'd drink it first. Her sobs turned into quiet hiccups. I sighed, turning toward the door. I'm not calling the police, not yet. But you tell your husband I know. And you tell him I'm not the kind of woman who forgets. As I picked up my purse, she whispered, Mama, please don't hate me. I paused in the doorway. Hate you? I said softly. No, baby, I don't hate you. But I don't recognize you anymore, and that's worse. When I stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. I stood by my car for a long moment, watching the reflection of her house in my windshield. It looked perfect. White siding, fresh paint, flowers by the porch. But I knew now that beauty could hide rot underneath. Inside, my daughter was crying, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush in to comfort her, because this time, she had to sit with what she'd done. That night, I sat up long after the house went quiet. The wind outside pushed through the trees, brushing against the windows like restless fingers, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a thought I didn't want to face. I couldn't stop thinking about Danielle, about the look on her face when I said her name, the way her voice cracked when she said, It wasn't supposed to happen. A mother's love doesn't vanish, but it does shift. It changes shape, and mine had turned into something heavy, something that felt like grief. When the sun rose, I called the school. "Hi, this is Martha Johnson. I'm Eli's grandmother. I'll be picking him up today instead of his parents." The secretary didn't question it. "No problem, ma'am." By noon, I was standing outside the gates of the elementary school. Kids spilled out like laughter in motion, bright, carefree, running toward cars and waiting arms, and there he was, my boy, with his backpack dragging and his curls bouncing. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. "Grandma!" he called, running into my arms. I held him tighter than I probably should have. "Hey, baby, Grandma's got you today, okay?" He nodded, smiling. "Can we get ice cream?" I smiled too, but it didn't reach my eyes. "We sure can." We stopped by the little parlor near Maple Street, the same one Danielle used to beg me for when she was small. I ordered him a vanilla cone and got myself a coffee. He sat swinging his feet, licking his cone, looking perfectly content, until he noticed I wasn't eating. "What's wrong, Grandma?" he asked softly. I smiled faintly. "Just thinking, sugar." "You know Grandma does a lot of that." He nodded, serious now. "Mommy says you worry too much." My chest tightened. "She does, huh? What else does Mommy say about me?" He hesitated, licking a drip of ice cream before answering. "She said you might forget stuff sometimes. And that's why Daddy has to help you with papers." I leaned in a little. "What kind of papers?" He looked down. "I don't know. Daddy said they're house papers. He said one day the house will be mine, so I should be happy." My heart skipped. "He said that?" He nodded. But Mommy didn't look happy. She was crying in the kitchen one night. I heard Daddy say, "She'll sign whatever we put in front of her if she thinks it's helping." My breath caught. "Did he say who he was talking about?" Eli looked up, eyes wide and sad. "You, Grandma." It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and twisted something vital. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Eli," I said carefully, "when did you hear that?" He thought for a moment. "A few weeks before the baby shower. Mommy said she didn't want to do it, but Daddy said they already told the lawyer." "Do what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He frowned, confused. "Daddy said after you sign, everything will be nice and quiet, that you'll be safe." I forced a shaky smile. "Safe, huh?" He nodded again, then looked down at his cone. "Grandma, am I in trouble?" That broke me a little. I reached across the table and took his tiny hand in mine. "No, baby. You did good. You told me the truth, and that's never wrong." He smiled weakly, relief washing over his face. "Mommy said I shouldn't talk about it." But I didn't like the way Daddy sounded. He gets scary when he talks about money. Money. It always comes back to money. I squeezed his hand. "Eli, listen to Grandma. You ever hear grown folks arguing again? You don't get involved, okay? You just come tell me. Promise?" He nodded solemnly. "I promise." When I dropped him back home, Danielle's car wasn't there yet. Calvin's SUV was parked in the driveway, shining like it owned the world. I walked him to the porch. "Go on inside, sweetheart. Grandma will wait till your mama gets home." He smiled, gave me a quick hug, and ran in. I stood there for a while, watching that perfect house. Then I saw the curtains shift, someone inside, watching me. A second later, Calvin stepped out. Suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie loose, that practiced charm painted on his face. "Well, look who's here," he said. "Didn't expect you." "I came to see my grandson," I said evenly. He smirked. "Of course. Danielle mentioned you might drop by." There was something in the way he said it. Might drop by, like he was measuring my next move. "You know," I said slowly, "he's a bright boy. Reminds me a lot of his mama." Calvin's grin faltered. "Yeah, he's sharp. Gets that from my side," I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but he's got more honesty than either of you." For a split second, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped. "Careful, Miss Martha. Wouldn't want you stressing yourself out. Not good for the heart." I held his gaze, calm and steady. "Funny thing about hearts? They get stronger when they break." He didn't reply. Just stared, smile gone. Then he turned and walked back inside, closing the door a little too slowly, like he wanted me to know he was in control. But he wasn't. Not anymore, because I finally understood what kind of man he was, and what kind of mother I had to be to stop him. As I drove home, Eli's words echoed in my mind. "Daddy said after you sign, everything will be nice and quiet." nice and quiet. That's what you say when you're planning to silence someone. Cliffhanger, end of section 6. When I got home that night, I pulled out every document, every bank statement, every piece of paper I'd ever signed since my surgery, and at the bottom of one of them, in tiny print, I saw it. Transfer of ownership, pending beneficiary approval. Calvin's name was there, so was Danielle's, but mine? Mine was nowhere to be found, and for the first time in my life, I realized my daughter hadn't just betrayed me, she'd helped bury me alive, one signature at a time. I'd always believed homes had memories, that if the walls could talk, they'd whisper the truth about what happened inside them. That night, I learned my house had been whispering for months. I just hadn't been listening. After finding that document, my name missing where it used to be, I didn't sleep. I turned every drawer inside out, pulled files from the cabinet, and spread them across the dining table like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. There were papers I remembered signing after my surgery, half-conscious, blurry from medication. Danielle had told me they were temporary caretaking agreements, things to make it easier for her and Calvin to pay the bills while I recovered. But looking at them now, I saw legal words I hadn't noticed before: transfer of authority, joint control, beneficiary clause. Each phrase felt like a bruise I hadn't realized I was carrying. By dawn, I was sitting in the quiet, surrounded by papers, shaking my head in disbelief. How had I been so blind? When you raise someone, you think you'll always see through their lies, that the bond between mother and child makes you immune. But betrayal doesn't start loud. It starts gentle, familiar. It starts with trust. Around mid-morning, I called an old friend, Lillian Gray, who'd worked in real estate law before retiring. "Lillian, it's Martha," I said, my voice trembling just enough to betray the storm inside me. "I think someone's been playing with my house papers." She didn't hesitate. "Bring everything over. We'll go through it together." I packed a folder so thick it barely closed, drove across town, and laid everything out on her kitchen table. She put on her reading glasses, looked at the first page, and went quiet. After 10 minutes, she sighed deeply and looked up. "Martha, these aren't temporary documents," she said softly. This is a full property transfer. You signed over joint ownership to your daughter and her husband." My heart dropped. "But it says pending beneficiary approval. Doesn't that mean it's not complete?" She nodded slowly. "Technically, yes, but the final transfer could have gone through any day now. All it needs is a secondary confirmation, usually a signature or a notary stamp. Once that's done, the house isn't yours anymore." I stared at the papers, my mouth dry. "So if I hadn't found this, they could have finished the job?" Lillian's expression softened. "They already tried, honey. You just got lucky." I sat back, numb. Lucky. That's what she called it. Lillian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You need to see a lawyer. Someone who can reverse this before it's too late." I nodded, silent. Before I left, she folded one paper carefully and handed it back to me. "Keep this one safe. It's the transfer summary. It's what they needed you to forget existed." Driving home, I felt something shift inside me, something cold and clear. For weeks I'd been drowning in pain. But now I felt focused, because grief is heavy. But anger? Anger moves. That evening, I called the bank. The woman on the line was polite until she realized what I was asking. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson. I see there was a joint authorization added to your mortgage and savings accounts last spring," she said. "Who authorized it?" I asked, though I already knew. "Danielle Parker," she replied. "Along with a co-signer, Calvin Parker." I hung up before she could finish. My hands were trembling again, not from fear this time, but fury. I walked through my home, room by room, seeing everything differently. The framed photos on the walls, the smell of lavender cleaner, the dent in the old armchair from years of sitting in the same spot. This wasn't just a house. It was the story of my life, and they had tried to steal it from me. When I reached the bedroom, I noticed something strange. The top drawer of my dresser slightly open. I hadn't touched it in days. Inside, some of my old bank envelopes were missing, and the back corner of one document had a faint coffee stain, the same one I'd seen on Calvin's desk months ago when he helped me print out forms. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just Danielle's doing. This was Calvin's plan from the start. He had studied me, my routines, my kindness, my weakness for believing in the best in people, and he'd turned all of that into his weapon. But what he didn't know was that I still had something he couldn't forge: time, patience, and a lifetime of watching men like him destroy themselves. By the next morning, I was sitting across from my lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Whitaker, who'd handled my husband's will years ago. He flipped through the papers carefully, his expression growing darker with every page. "Mrs. Johnson," he said finally, "this looks like a coordinated fraud. You were misled into signing over property and power of attorney while under medical recovery. That's illegal. Can it be reversed?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "but it'll take proof. I can start by freezing the current transfer, but you'll need to move fast. Do you want to press charges?" I stared at the floor for a long moment. "Not yet. I just want my house back," he nodded. "Then we'll file an injunction today. And Mrs. Johnson, don't contact your daughter or her husband for now. Let's keep this quiet." I smiled thinly. "Don't worry, I'm done talking." That night, I poured myself a small glass of tea, sat by the window, and watched the porch light flicker against the dark. The papers were locked in my desk. The lawyer was handling the legal part, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Calvin wouldn't let go easily, and Danielle, sweet, scared Danielle, was still trapped in his web. So I decided I'd let him think he'd won. For now, because I wasn't done listening to the whispers in my walls. And soon, those whispers would turn into thunder. I didn't plan to see them again so soon, but when your enemy brings the fight to your doorstep, you don't hide, you answer the door. It was a gray afternoon when it happened. Sky low and heavy like it was waiting to witness something ugly. I was in the kitchen steeping tea when I heard the tires crunch on my driveway. Then 3 sharp knocks, not Danielle's kind, Calvin's kind. I dried my hands, straightened my cardigan, and opened the door. There he was, Calvin Parker. That same too perfect smile, except now it didn't even bother pretending to reach his eyes. His jaw was tight, his knuckles pale from how hard he was gripping his phone, and behind him stood Danielle. My baby, her face blotchy, eyes swollen from crying, a small cut at the corner of her lip. My chest seized. "What happened to you?" "Mama," she whispered, shaking her head. "Please don't." Calvin stepped forward, cutting her off. "We need to talk, Miss Martha." I raised an eyebrow. "Do we?" He exhaled through his nose. "You've made a serious mistake. My lawyer says you're trying to block a legal property transfer. That's fraud." I smiled faintly, calm as Sunday morning. "Fraud's a strong word, Calvin, especially coming from a man who uses his wife's mother's signature like a spare key." His eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to tell me I'd hit the mark. Danielle's breath hitched. "Mama, please, can we not do this here?" "Oh, we're doing this exactly here," I said. "Right where it all started." I stepped aside. "Come in." They entered, tension thick enough to choke on. Calvin stayed standing, arms crossed like he owned the place. Danielle hovered near the couch, hands shaking. I leaned against the table. "I know what you did," I said softly. "Both of you. The fake signatures, the bank changes, the cake." Danielle's knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch, sobbing. "Mama, I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. "I didn't know what he was planning until it was too late." Calvin rolled his eyes. "Oh, stop it, Danielle. You're making yourself look weak." I turned to him slowly. "Weak? No, Calvin. You're the weak one. Takes a coward to hide behind a woman and call it strength." His voice hardened. "You're confused, Miss Martha. You gave us this house. You signed everything. There's no going back now." "Oh, there's going back," I said, my tone steady. "You forgot one small thing. Consent means nothing when it's obtained through deceit. My lawyer froze the documents yesterday." His smirk faltered. "What lawyer?" "The one who's better than yours," I said, meeting his stare. For the first time, Calvin's face changed, not to anger, but calculation. He took a slow step closer. "You really think you can win this, old lady?" he said, voice dropping low. "The system doesn't care about you. It cares about paperwork, and I've got every piece of it." I smiled. "You sure about that?" Before he could answer, Danielle stood up suddenly, "Stop it, both of you!" she cried. She turned to him, tears streaming. "Calvin, please, I can't do this anymore. I lied to my own mother for you. I nearly what?" he snapped. "Say it." She covered her mouth, sobbing harder. I stepped closer, voice quiet but sharp. "You nearly poisoned me, didn't you, Danielle?" Her eyes darted up, raw, red, full of guilt. "I didn't know what it was," she screamed. "He told me it was just a sedative. He said it would calm you down, make you sign without a fight." Calvin turned toward her slowly. "You talk too much." Danielle flinched. That was it. Something inside me snapped. "You listen to me," I said, stepping between them. "You might think you've got power, Calvin, with your fancy words and fake charm, but you forget who you're dealing with. I built this home with a man who worked himself to the bone so his family could have something real. You don't get to walk in here and rewrite that," he laughed, that same arrogant chuckle that made my skin crawl. "You're finished, Martha. The papers are already in motion. You can't stop it." "Maybe not," I said. "But you'll wish I hadn't tried." Right then, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. A message from Mr. Whitaker. "Records confirmed. Property fraud documented. Keep them there. Authorities notified." I looked back up, calm. "You were saying?" Calvin's expression froze. Danielle gasped, covering her mouth. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 more knocks. This time, not Calvin's kind. Through the window, I saw the blue and red flash of lights reflected across my front yard. Danielle's voice cracked. "Mama, what did you do?" "What you should have done a long time ago," I said. 2 officers stepped in. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker?" one asked. "We need you to come with us for questioning regarding a pending fraud investigation." Calvin tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Danielle just cried, whispering my name like it might save her. They led him out first. Danielle followed, trembling, glancing back at me through tears. I didn't say a word. When the door closed, the silence hit me like a wave. I sat down on the couch, breathing deeply. The same couch where Danielle had once fallen asleep watching cartoons, where Eli had eaten cookies with crumbs all over the cushions. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. After a few minutes, I stood and began tidying the table, anything to quiet my hands. That's when I noticed something under the coffee table, a small velvet pouch. Danielle must have dropped it in the chaos. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a small glass vial, half full, faintly tinted yellow, and on the label, in Calvin's handwriting, mild sedative, safe dosage. My fingers tightened around it until the glass bit into my palm. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after a storm, not peace, not really, but the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what you'll do next. That's what my house felt like the day after the police took Calvin and Danielle away. The curtains hung still. The air smelled like rain and old wood, and every corner seemed to hum with the echo of what had just happened. I didn't cry. Not even once. There were no tears left to give. Instead, I made tea. Poured it slow, steady. Sat by the window watching the police cars disappear down Magnolia Street. Then I called Mr. Whitaker. "They'll try to talk their way out," he warned. "Calvin especially. Men like him don't fold easily." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not done." He paused. "You mean to press charges?" I looked down at my reflection in the tea, my tired eyes, my wrinkled hands, the woman who'd spent her whole life loving people who forgot how to love back. "No," I said softly. "Pressing charges is what he expects. I'm going to do something better." That night, I pulled out my late husband's old lockbox, the one with his insurance papers, his service medals, and a small folder marked Johnson Family Trust. He used to say, "Martha, one day you'll thank me for being paranoid." And Lord, I finally did. Inside was the original deed to the house, not the reissued copy Calvin had filed months ago. I flipped it open, traced my husband's signature with my finger, and felt something I hadn't in weeks: control. The next morning, I met Mr. Whitaker at his office. "I want to create a revocable trust," I told him. "Everything in my name, the house, the savings, all of it goes into that trust." He nodded, taking notes. "And who's the beneficiary?" I smiled. "My grandson, Eli Parker." He looked up. "Not your daughter?" I shook my head. Not anymore. For a long moment, he just watched me, then said quietly, "You're doing the right thing." "I'm doing the necessary thing," I corrected. We spent the next few hours drafting every detail. A clause to ensure Eli's inheritance couldn't be touched by his parents until he turned 25. A safeguard to transfer assets immediately if any fraud or coercion was detected. By the time I signed the final page, I felt lighter, like every pen stroke was washing years of pain off my shoulders. When I got home, the phone was ringing, Danielle's number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, that small piece of love that never quite dies, made me pick up. "Mama?" Her voice was small, fragile, like she was calling from a distance. "I'm here," I said evenly. "They let me go," she whispered. "Calvin made bail too. They said we can't contact you, but I had to. I needed you to know I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. "Are you?" "Yes," she sobbed. "I didn't know what he'd done, Mama. I swear I thought it was just temporary, that it'd all be okay once the baby came. I didn't want to lose everything." "You already did," I said softly. "You just don't know it yet." She fell silent, only the sound of her crying filling the line. After a while, I said, "Danielle, I don't hate you. I never could. But I need you to understand something. Love doesn't mean blind trust. Love means accountability. You have to face what you let happen." "I know," she whispered. "I'll fix it, Mama, I promise." "No," I said. "I will." And I hung up. Over the next week, I worked quietly, methodically, the same way I used to handle my husband's hospital bills after he passed. I called banks, closed accounts, opened new ones under the trust, changed the locks on every door. Then I did something that would make Calvin's blood boil. I called the local paper. A kind young reporter named Angela came by, notebook in hand. "You said you wanted to talk about elder fraud?" "Yes," I said, motioning her inside. "About how sometimes it doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people sitting across the dinner table." Her eyebrows lifted, intrigued. "Do you mind if I record this?" I smiled. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Let the world hear." I told her everything. The forged documents, the cake, the lies. Not once did I raise my voice. I didn't have to. The truth did all the heavy lifting. By the time she left, her hands were shaking around her recorder. This story could really make a difference," she said softly. "I hope it does," I replied, "for all the other mothers who trusted the wrong people." 2 days later, the article went live. "Local woman outsmarts family in property fraud scheme, turns the tables quietly." It spread faster than gossip in a church hallway. By evening, I had neighbors calling, church friends visiting, people from all over the county sending letters saying, "You made me brave." And somewhere out there, Calvin Parker's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. My phone buzzed again that night, another unknown number. "You think you've won," I typed back. "I don't think." "I know." Then I blocked the number. I walked out onto my porch and sat under the soft glow of the lantern. The night air was cool, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, faint, patient, familiar. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled, because the storm was no longer coming for me. It was coming from me. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop running from what hurt you, when you finally decide to walk straight toward it, steady and unafraid. That's the peace I felt 3 weeks later when I sent out 2 invitations, one addressed to Danielle Parker, the other to Calvin Parker. Each card read the same: dinner. Sunday, 6 p.m., no lawyers, no police. Just family. I knew they'd come. Guilt pulls harder than love ever can. That Sunday, I set the table the way I used to when Danielle was little. Real silverware. Candles, cornbread still warm from the oven, collard greens simmering on the stove. The smell of home filled the air, soft and deceptive. I wore my good dress. The one Henry had bought me on our 20th anniversary, navy blue with pearl buttons and a matching brooch. The kind of outfit that said, "I'm not broken. I'm ready." At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard a car door slam, then another. Through the lace curtains, I saw them walking up the path. Calvin in his crisp white shirt, pretending control. Danielle, pale, nervous, clutching her purse like it might protect her. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said. "Dinner's ready." Danielle hesitated, but Calvin stepped forward with a smirk. "You're feeling generous tonight, Miss Martha." "Something like that," I said. "Sit down. Let's eat." We gathered around the table, the same table where Danielle once did homework, where Eli learned to pray before meals. Now it felt like a stage, and I was the only one who knew the script. The meal started quiet. Danielle picked at her food, eyes darting everywhere but mine. Calvin ate with forced casualness, as if trying to prove something. After a few minutes, he set his fork down. "So," he said, leaning back, "I hear you've been busy." I smiled. "You could say that. Making yourself out to be some kind of hero?" "That newspaper article, clever move. Public sympathy always helps in court." I sipped my tea. "I didn't write that for the court, Calvin. I wrote it for the truth," he snorted. "Truth doesn't pay the bills, Miss Martha. Property does." I smiled again, slow, deliberate. "Then you'll be happy to know I'm not keeping it." Danielle's head snapped up. "What?" I looked at her gently. "I transferred the house and all my assets into a trust. For Eli. It's already finalized." Calvin froze, his hand tightening around his glass. "You did what?" "I gave everything to the only person in this family who's ever been honest with me." The silence that followed was heavy enough to make the air vibrate. Danielle started crying quietly. Calvin didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me, jaw clenched. "You think that'll hold?" he finally said, his voice low. "You think you can just rewrite everything?" "I don't think," I said softly. "I know," he leaned forward, sneering. "You've been lucky so far, old lady. But you're out of your league. The system doesn't care about sob stories. It cares about signatures, and I've got plenty of yours." I tilted my head. "Do you?" He frowned. I reached under the table and slid a thick manila envelope toward him. "Go ahead. Open it." He hesitated, then ripped it open. Inside were printed documents, every forged paper he'd submitted. Every fraudulent signature, each one stamped with the words "void," "fraud confirmed," and on top of it all, a single notarized page signed by Mr. Whitaker. "Property transfer. Nullified by court order. Investigation complete." Calvin's face turned red, then pale. Danielle gasped, covering her mouth. "How?" he started. "You were sloppy," I said. "You left copies in your office printer. You left timestamps. You even sent an email to the notary with my forged signature attached." Danielle looked at me, stunned. "Mama, how did you—" "I didn't have to," I interrupted. "You left a trail. All I had to do was stop pretending not to see it." Calvin shoved back from the table, standing up. "You think you can embarrass me, in my town? You don't know who you're dealing with." I rose too, calm, unshaken. "You're right. I didn't know, but now I do. You're a man who hides behind paperwork because he's too afraid to face the woman he tried to rob." He glared down at me. "You ruined us." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." For a moment, all I could hear was the tick of the wall clock. Then Danielle stood, trembling. "Calvin, please." "Stop." He turned on her, eyes sharp. "You did this! You and your bleeding heart! You couldn't keep quiet." "Quiet?" I said, stepping between them. "You mean obedient." He took one step closer. "You're going to regret this," I smiled. "You already said that once, and yet here we are." At that exact moment, headlights flashed across the window. A car pulled up outside. Calvin turned. "Who's that?" I folded my hands. "Mr. Whitaker," I said simply. He brought the sheriff with him. They'd like to discuss the additional evidence I provided. Calvin froze. Danielle let out a quiet sob. "I wanted to tell you to your face," I said softly, "so you'd understand what it feels like to lose something you thought was already yours." 2 knocks on the door. I opened it, and the sheriff stepped in, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Johnson." "Evening, Sheriff," I said calmly. "You're right on time." He nodded, then turned to Calvin. "Mr. Parker, you'll need to come with us again." Calvin didn't move. He just looked at me, eyes full of hate, mouth twitching like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I held his gaze, steady. "You forgot something, Calvin," I said quietly. "You taught my daughter to lie, but you taught me how to win." He finally turned, fists clenched, as the sheriff led him out. Danielle stayed behind, shaking, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Mama, what have we done?" I took her hand gently. "You made your choices, baby. But I made mine too. and mine was to make sure Eli still has a future, one that doesn't have your mistakes written on it. She crumpled against me, sobbing into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes, holding her just long enough to remember what it felt like when she was still my little girl, the one who used to believe her mama could fix anything. And for a moment, I almost believed it too. The morning after the dinner, the world felt quieter, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after the truth finally claws its way out. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the air cool and thick with dew. The sheriff's car tracks were still faint in the gravel. The candles from last night's table had burned down to puddles of wax. Almost looked like a battlefield. And maybe it was. My phone buzzed just as the sun broke through the clouds. It was a call from Mr. Whitaker. Martha, he said, his tone steady but lighter than it had been in weeks. You'll want to hear this. The DA's office is opening a full case. Calvin's signature trail matches 3 other fraudulent transfers under his company. He's looking at serious charges. I didn't speak for a long moment. I just closed my eyes, letting the warmth of relief settle somewhere deep in my bones. Justice doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it whispers. Thank you, Henry, I said softly. For everything, he cleared his throat. Don't thank me yet. There's something else. Danielle came in this morning, alone. She gave a statement, said she was coerced, provided copies of text messages, emails, even a recording. My chest tightened. A recording? Yes. She recorded Calvin admitting he altered your documents and told her not to tell you. He paused, his voice softening. She's going to cooperate, Martha. It'll go easier for her. I stared at the horizon, the line where the sky met the earth, steady and endless. Maybe that's her first real step back. By afternoon, the story had broken again. Businessman charged in elder fraud scheme. Wife cooperates with authorities. It spread like wildfire. Every detail of what Calvin had done came pouring out. The fake accounts, the property forgeries, the attempts to gaslight older clients into signing caretaker documents. He wasn't just a liar. He was a predator in a tailored suit. And now everyone knew his name. Neighbors who used to smile politely now crossed the street when they saw Danielle's car. The women from church called to make sure I was all right, their voices a mix of pity and awe. Martha, one of them said, you handled this like the Lord himself guided your hand. I smiled faintly. Maybe he did. Or maybe he just gave me enough sense to stop letting people walk over me. 3 days later, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, Danielle stood there, no makeup, no pretense. Just swollen eyes and trembling hands. Can I come in? She asked. I nodded, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, looking around like she was seeing the house for the first time. The same living room she'd grown up in, where she learned to walk, where she'd blown out birthday candles, where she'd once danced to Aretha Franklin in her socks. It feels smaller, she murmured. No, I said softly. You just got too big for it, she flinched, her voice cracking. I deserved that. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same one from the night before the storm. I told them everything, she said. About the papers, the accounts, even the cake. I told them I was weak, that I let him talk me into things because I didn't want to lose him. Tears filled her eyes. I was so stupid, Mama. I reached across the table, not touching her hand. Not yet. No, baby, you were scared, and scared people do stupid things. But you're not scared anymore, are you? She shook her head. No. We sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with everything that couldn't be undone. Finally, she whispered, How do you still look at me? After everything, I looked her right in the eyes. Because you're still my child. And no mistake, no man, no paper in the world can unmake that. But loving you doesn't mean letting you keep breaking me. She broke then, sobbing, reaching for me. This time, I let her. Her head pressed against my shoulder, like it had when she was 5 years old, crying over a scraped knee. Only now, it wasn't her knee that hurt. It was her soul. We stayed like that for a long while. No words, just the sound of breathing and the ticking clock. When she finally pulled away, she said, What happens now? I exhaled slowly. You testify. You tell the truth. You take whatever comes, and then you start over. Not for me. For Eli, she nodded, wiping her face. I will. The day of the hearing came fast. I didn't go inside the courtroom. I couldn't. I waited outside on the steps while the wind tugged at my coat. When they brought Calvin out in cuffs, he looked smaller. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a man who finally realized what he'd lost. Danielle walked out behind him later, escorted by a clerk. When she saw me, she froze, then came down the steps, shoulders straight. "He took the deal," she said quietly. 5 years minimum. Her eyes welled up again. "It's really over," I nodded. "It's over for him. Not for you. You've still got work to do." She looked at me, searching, pleading, and then nodded again. As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Danielle." She looked back. "You still got a mama," I said softly. "But next time you'll have to earn her." Her lips quivered and she nodded. Then she walked away. That night, I came home to a quiet house and found Eli's crayon drawing still pinned to the fridge. A picture of the three of us, him, his mama, and me, standing under a big yellow sun. He'd written in shaky letters, "Grandma's house forever." I smiled through the tears I'd been holding back for weeks. He didn't know how true those words were, not just for the deed, but for the love that had somehow survived every lie, every bruise, every betrayal. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar, sometimes it just whispers, "You made it." The weeks that followed were a strange mix of calm and ache, like the air after a storm when everything looks clear, but the ground is still wet with what it's lost. I'd thought that once Calvin was gone, the anger would fade. But it lingered, soft and stubborn, like smoke that refuses to leave the room. Every day I found new ways to fill the quiet. I repainted the kitchen, fixed the loose hinge on the porch door, replanted the hydrangeas out front that Calvin once called a waste of yard space. They bloomed bright and defiant, blue as morning sky. But the real work wasn't in the house. It was in me. There's a cost to betrayal that no court can measure. It doesn't end with justice. It ends when your heart decides to start beating normal again. Some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of signatures and forged papers. Other nights, I'd dream of Danielle as a child, chasing fireflies, laughing under the porch light. And when I woke from those, I'd cry quietly into my pillow, because those memories still hurt in the sweetest way. Danielle started calling once a week. At first, it was awkward, stiff, polite, like we were strangers sharing blood. "Hi, Mama, just checking in. I'm fine, baby. How's Eli?" "He's good. Doing well in school." "That's good to hear." Silence would follow, thick, heavy silence. Then one of us would sigh and say goodbye. But as the months passed, something shifted. Her voice began to sound lighter, less like guilt, more like growth. One afternoon, she called and said softly, "Mama, I started going to counseling. They said I have to face the things I ignored, the way I let people control me." I smiled faintly. "That's a good start. I want to do better," she whispered. "I want Eli to see something different in me." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Then show him. Don't talk about it. Just show him." Eli came to stay with me every other weekend. He'd run up the porch steps shouting, "Grandma, I'm home!" Like he knew exactly what that word meant. We'd bake cookies, watch cartoons, play checkers. He'd help me water the plants, always careful not to splash the petals. One day, as we sat on the porch swing, he looked up and said, "Grandma, Mommy said you're the strongest person she knows." I smiled, heart tightening. "Did she now?" He nodded. "She said you saved us." I looked out across the yard, the same yard where his mama once learned to ride a bike, where I'd taught her that falling didn't mean failing, as long as she got back up. "Maybe I did," I said softly. "But one day it'll be your turn to save someone." He grinned. "I will." And for the first time in a long time, I believed in the future again. As for Calvin, the papers said he pleaded guilty. Fraud, coercion, attempted elder abuse. 5 years minimum, no early release. The news stations covered it for a week, then moved on to fresher scandals. But in town, people didn't forget. His company collapsed. His name became a warning. "Be careful who you trust," folks would whisper. "Even wolves wear suits." Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window and wonder what Henry would think of it all. I liked to believe he'd be proud. Not just that I fought back, but that I didn't lose myself doing it, because revenge is hollow when it turns you into what you're fighting. I didn't want to destroy them, just wanted the truth to live longer than the lies. On the first Sunday of summer, Danielle came over with Eli. She looked different, tired maybe, but clearer. The kind of tired that comes from finally telling the truth and letting it rest. "I brought something," she said, setting a small cake box on the counter. I laughed softly. "After everything, you still brought cake?" She smiled through tears. "I made it myself. Thought maybe we could start over." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter again. Not the woman who'd lied to me, but the little girl who used to hum while stirring batter, who always licked the spoon and got frosting on her nose. I nodded. "All right then, let's start over." We sat at the table. She cut 2 small slices. Eli watched us carefully, probably remembering the last time a cake had meant danger. Danielle noticed too. She smiled at him and said, "See, baby? This time, it's just sweetness." He relaxed, grinning, and so did I. We ate quietly. 3 generations bound by mistakes and second chances. The cake wasn't perfect, a little dry on the edges, uneven frosting, but it tasted like healing. Afterward, Danielle stood to leave. She hugged me tight, whispering, "I don't deserve you." I held her just long enough to say, "Then keep earning me." That night, as the sun set behind the magnolia trees, I sat on the porch with my tea and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the justice, the forgiveness I never thought I'd find. People think revenge is about getting even, but it isn't. It's about reclaiming your peace, piece by piece, until your soul finally feels like home again, and mine did. The cicadas had started their summer chorus again, that soft, humming rhythm that only comes when the world has finally decided to rest. I sat on my porch that evening, the same way I had for years, tea in hand, slippers on, watching the sun dip behind the magnolia trees. But this time, it felt different, lighter, like the air itself was forgiving me for all the nights I'd filled it with my tears. Danielle and Eli had just left. The sound of their laughter still floated down the street like a melody that didn't quite fade. She'd hugged me longer this time, not out of guilt, but gratitude. And when she looked me in the eyes and said, "I love you, Mama," it didn't sound like a plea anymore. It sounded like truth. I closed my eyes, listening to the porch boards creak beneath my rocking chair. Each creak had a story, one for every heartbreak, every prayer, every promise I'd ever made to myself and somehow kept. That house had seen me through it all. Love, loss, betrayal, and rebirth. But tonight it didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like home again. The mail came just before dusk. I almost didn't check it. Bills could wait till morning. But something nudged me. Inside the box, among the usual envelopes, was a single letter in handwriting I knew too well. Danielle's. I sat back down on the porch and opened it carefully. Inside was a short note, written in her slanted script, the same way she used to write me Mother's Day cards when she was little. "Mama, I don't know how to thank you for giving me another chance. I don't deserve your grace, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. I've started volunteering at the Women's Center downtown, helping other women who've been hurt or controlled. I tell them about you, about how strong you are, about how love can be soft and fierce at the same time. You once told me that love doesn't mean letting people hurt you. It means showing them what real love looks like, even when it's tough. I finally understand that now. I'm proud to be your daughter. Love, Danielle." By the time I reached her name, my vision blurred. The paper shook in my hands, stained with tears I hadn't planned to cry. There are apologies that fix things, and others that simply remind you why they were worth fixing in the first place. This one did both. I stayed on that porch until the sky turned navy blue and the stars came out like scattered prayers. Fireflies blinked across the yard, and from the open window inside, I could hear Eli humming softly as he played with his toy cars. The sound warmed me, a reminder that the world keeps turning no matter how hard it's been shaken. For so long, I'd carried bitterness like armor. But bitterness is heavy, and that night, I decided to finally set it down. I whispered into the quiet, I forgive you, Danielle. The words left my lips like a confession, trembling at first, then strong. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what they did. It's about refusing to let it define who you are, and who I was, who I am, is a woman who survived. A breeze drifted through the trees, soft and kind. It lifted the lace curtain in the window, brushed against my cheek, and for a fleeting moment I thought I smelled Henry's cologne, cedar and aftershave, faint but familiar. I smiled. You'd be proud of her, I whispered to him. Of us. Somewhere inside, Eli laughed again, bright, unburdened. I leaned back in my chair, letting the rhythm of the creaks match the rhythm of my heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, both were steady. Later, as I locked up the house, I paused by the mantel. 3 photos sat there now. One of Henry and me on our wedding day, one of baby Danielle in my arms, and a new one I'd added just that morning, Eli holding a jar full of fireflies, smiling like the world belonged to him. Underneath it, in a simple wooden frame, I'd written a few words on a piece of paper and tucked it behind the glass. What they tried to take from me became my strength. I turned off the lamp and stepped outside again. The moonlight spilled across the porch, silver and soft. I breathed it in. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with clarity, with the kind of quiet that comes when you've fought every battle, lost what you had to, and still found the will to love what's left. And what was left for me was enough. Eli came running out barefoot, holding something behind his back. "Grandma," he said, grinning. "Close your eyes." I did. When I opened them, he was holding a small plate, a slice of chocolate cake, slightly lopsided, frosting messy but sweet. "Mommy said we baked this for you," he said proudly. "It's your favorite." I laughed, my voice catching just a little. "You sure it's safe to eat this time?" He giggled. "I helped. It's perfect." I took a bite, warm, soft, just right. And in that moment, every ghost that had ever haunted this home disappeared. The hurt, the fear, the lies, all of it melted into something tender, something true. I smiled at my grandson, his eyes glowing in the porch light. "Thank you, baby," I said. "It's perfect." He beamed, running back inside to tell his mama I liked it. I watched him go, the screen door swinging gently behind him, and whispered to the night, "We're all right now." The stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, the house exhaling with me. And just like that, it was over. Not in anger, not in tears, but in peace.